morning sun shines on the gleaming hide of a muscular ranch horse. The aroma of bacon and coffee drifts from the wood cook stove at a cow camp. Silver spurs jingle as the men and women of the West get set for another day in the saddle. From the heart of Canada's finest ranching country, this is the Spirit of the West with rancher and horse trainer Hugh McLennan and his collection of music, poetry, and conversations with the folks who live and work with horses and cattle in the Spirit of the West.
You know, I'm grateful for a lot of things, and one of them is that we live in a part of the West where we can still move cattle across some big parts of the country using good horses and a crew of good cowboys, both men and women. And as we're doing that, I often reflect back on the days when those drives went on for weeks and months. And today, we'll bring you some of the fascinating history and music of the early cattle drives.
And they decided originally they would drive them to the head of the railway that was being constructed across the United States and then take them to the Chicago market.
And with the fall run well underway, the calves are really looking good, and the Rangeland News looks at the market.
Feeder calves are fetching a bit more money than last year.
And if you've spent much time around Baxter Black, you realize that no matter what the situation, when he's in front of an audience, he sure doesn't need notes or a script.
I know where I developed that ability and honed my skill at filling dead air. I used to announce Little Britches Rodeo.
On the Irvin Saddles and Western Wear horse training file, a listener complains that his young and fairly green horse won't hold a lope or a canter for more than about 20 strides, and then he gets tired of pedaling to keep him going. And I'll offer some ideas that just might help. And the days when we're bringing cows and calves off the summer range, it can be a long day in the saddle, but it wasn't that long ago when those days went on for weeks. It was a way of life for a lot of young cowboys, and here's Jill Jones.
Well, I chose to roam far from my home back when I was 17. Well, I had to see what I could be. I was young and raw and lean. So I rode one day down Texas way to the banks of the Rio Grande. And a hand I made at the cowboy trade in the big wide lonesome land. Well, I trail the longhorn cattle, that's the only life for me. And I'm free as the wild wind, and the cowboy's all I'll be. So we rode for days through the longhorn straights till we had 3,000 head. And we roped and ran in the Texas sand. We earned our beans and bread. And then came the shout, let's move 'em out, take this beef to the Kansas range. So we aimed up north to venture forth on my ride up the Chisholm Trail. Well, I trail the longhorn cattle, that's the only life for me. And I'm free as the wild wind, and the cowboy's all I'll be. Oh, the rain was rough, yeah, the work was tough, and I earned about the day. But I baked and fried, Lord, it was dry. Why did I live that way? I swam the flood, bogged down in mud, I met the cold with the dust and hail. I took a Kiowa life with my Barlow knife on my ride up the Chisholm Trail. Well, I trail the longhorn cattle, that's the only life for me. And I'm free as the wild wind, and the cowboy's all I'll be. I'm on the prowl and I'm gonna howl when I ride into Abilene town. I'm gonna find me a girl and give her a whirl and dance around and round. But her heart will cry when I say goodbye, just to ride back San Antonio. If you can't have no wife in a cowboy life, I'll always live alone. So I trail the longhorn cattle, that's the only life for me. But I'm free as the wild wind and a cowboy's all I'll be.
You know, there's a stretch of highway between the West Coast and the British Columbia interior known as the Coquihalla. Only been open since 1986, and we've driven it many, many times, and I often look up at the steep granite cliffs, the deep valleys, and the raging rivers and wonder at the skill of the riders. Yes, the riders, because long before it was a highway, it was a cattle trail, and thousands of head made the trip both ways. Here's historian and author Ken Mather with more.
That's right. Of course, the rationale was you didn't want your cattle to lose weight as they traveled. And so since the Coquihalla Pass has some pretty areas that are a little thin on grass, you'd drive them slowly and you'd let them graze what they could along the way, and so you wouldn't lose too much weight on the cattle. But there's a great story told. George Mercer Dawson, who was the great surveyor of all of Western Canada, Dawson City is named after him, Dawson Creek. He was traveling along that trail, and he encountered some cowboys actually driving cattle up from the coast at this particular time. And these cattle that were being driven were bred cows, and a lot of them were dropping their calves along the way, and this was a tough thing for the cowboys to deal with. The calves just could not move fast enough to keep up, even at that leisurely pace. So the cowboys, being ingenious, if nothing else, decided that what they would do is they would try this out. They got a very calm pack horse, and they would put gunny sacks on each side of the horse and load the calves right in there, have one foreleg and a head sticking out, and calves were happy enough to not have to walk. And mums would follow along mooing after their calves, and everything was working out just fine. And so Dawson encountered these little heads and legs sticking out of gunny sacks along the trail and thought this was the most ingenious way of getting cattle to market.
Man, that's a different calving program.
That's for sure.
Yeah. Boy, they made it work. Coming up is a song about a trail from Montana into Alberta that really has some wild and woolly history surrounding it. And Ken Mather explains how the first cattle were trailed into what would become the vast ranch lands of Alberta, and they might not have got there the way you thought they did, when the Spirit of the West continues right after this. Welcome back to the Spirit of the West, living the life of the trail. The legendary cattle drives from Texas to Montana and up into Alberta have been recreated in movies and novels, and indeed they did take place. But you know, the first cattle to be trailed up to what would come to be known as the ranch lands of Alberta didn't come that way. Ken Mather is a historian and an author, and his fine book Buckaroos and Mud Pups is a carefully researched, fascinating read about what really happened in those early ranching days. And Ken, I guess, you know, the popular mythology, folklore, and or history indicates that the cattle that first populated Alberta's rangeland came up from Texas to Montana, I guess like the story in Lonesome Dove, but your research has indicated that some of the first cattle to populate southern Alberta didn't come from Texas, they came from B.C.
That's right. Of course, the 1870s were a time where the cattle herds in the interior of British Columbia were growing and the markets weren't. So the ranchers were always looking for a new market, and so they heard of things starting to open up in Alberta. The Northwest Mounted Police had arrived, and they decided they would round up a few hundred head of cattle and get them to Alberta. Well, that was quite an undertaking. They had to go down through the Okanagan Valley and trail them along the Dewdney Trail, which was pretty rough going, and up through this new pass they discovered called now the Crow's Nest Pass, and they came into southern Alberta that way. Arrived in the area of Fort Macleod, which was nothing but a fort in those days, and trailed them up. And one of the cowboys recalled later that one day they were fighting the mosquitoes. It was driving them near crazy, and the next morning they woke up with a foot of snow on the ground. So, I mean, it was a hard drive, but they ended up arriving near Morley, which was the missionary field among the Stoney Indians, where the McDougals were, and they arrived there in late fall, and the McDougals encouraged them to stay there for the winter and see what would happen market-wise come spring. Well, in the spring, there was this new fort being constructed just east of there, and they originally called it Fort Brisebois, but of course it eventually became Fort Calgary. And so John Shaw, who was the head of the cattle drive, he was the trail boss, he went out to talk to the Northwest Mounted Police there, and sure enough, they could use beef cattle. And so he began to sell off his couple of hundred head of cattle, one or two at a time, to the Mounties at Fort Calgary. And so I'm happy to tell our Alberta neighbors that the very first beef cattle to arrive in Calgary actually came out of British Columbia.
And that must have, can you imagine what life would be like on the trail for that many days? And It would be obviously in your bedroll under the stars, no chuck wagon, just the supplies and the food on a pack horse, and
That's right.
Day after day after day like that. And then once that was done, I guess a lot of those guys would just get back on their cow horse and ride back across the Continental Divide.
Well, that's right. And we do know that John Shaw, who was the organizer of the drive, decided he would head up to Fort Edmonton, thinking that was, someday going to be a big city. And the rest of the cowboys kind of shook their head and turned the other way with a fair bit of money in their saddlebags and headed back over the Crow's Nest Pass to the interior of British Columbia. Two of the cowboys we know who were on that drive. One was Frank O'Keefe. He was the brother of Cornelius O'Keefe, who started the O'Keefe Ranch. And another one was Charles Ashton. Now, he settled in the area that now is known as Ashton Creek. And so these early cowboys made a few dollars on this very first cattle drive into Alberta and ended up carrying on ranching in their own right when they got back to British Columbia.
Now, another historic trail runs from Fort Benton, Montana to Fort Whoop Up, Alberta, and it was historically known as the Whoop Up Trail. It was actually a trade route of the late 1800s that saw whiskey, cattle, guns, and outlaws pass over its deep tracks across the eastern slopes of the Rockies. Now, Wiley Gustafson grew up on the family ranch near Conrad, Montana, and every spring they celebrated Whoop Up Days, and that inspired Wiley to write this.
Riding, roping, loping, laughing out on the Whoop Up Trail. When the day is done, we'll have our fun, telling tall ones and singing old songs. Cinch up your cack, boy, screw her down tight. The Whoop Up Trail is a rocky ride over prickly pear and muddy gumbo. We'll point 'em north and away we go. Riding, roping, loping, laughing out on the Whoop Up Trail. When the day's done, we'll have our fun, telling tall ones and singing old songs. Gus is a hand who rides for the brand, slips his noose on a salted cayuse. Well, the morning is brisk and he's feeling risky. With the touch of his spur, he soars like a bird. Riding, roping, loping, laughing out on the Whoop Up Trail. When the day's done, we'll have our fun, telling tall ones and singing old songs.
I try to use yodeling with caution on the show, but every once in a while, when Wiley breaks out one like that, you gotta love it. And he made a lot of money on the Yahoo television commercial a few years back with his very distinctive yodel. Well, cattle, of course, were a big part of those early drives, but there's another part of the history of the West that hasn't maybe been given as much attention. But it was every bit as wild and Western as the cattle drives, and that's those horse drives. Thousands of horses were driven over those same trails.
That's right. Of course, the ranching industry was beginning to take off in Alberta at the end of the 1870s, the early 1880s. And British Columbia had a surplus of horses. In fact, if you went up in the hills in British Columbia, you could round up hundreds of wild horses. They really were thriving on the ranges of the high ranges of British Columbia. Now, they were tended to be a small horse. They were probably no more than 14, 15 hands, some of them. But they were hardy and strong, and they were built to run. And so what happened is the ranchers would round up as many cattle as they could. One of the earliest cattle drives was a man by the name of William Roper Hull, who had settled in the Kamloops area. Eventually ended up ranching near Calgary. Anyway, he rounded up 400 head of horses, and they drove them through the Okanagan Valley down into the States, and drove them across the Colville Reservation, and they crossed back into Canada at Bonner's Ferry and went across the Crow's Nest Pass into Alberta. And he traveled on to this new ranch that was being established. It was called the Bar U, and sold all the horses at that point for a nice tidy profit. And many ranchers followed suit. They rounded up horses and drove them into Alberta to where the market was growing every day. And the big ranches of Alberta were crying out for good horse flesh. So many of the early Alberta horses were these mountain ponies that had actually been rounded up in British Columbia.
Well, there's more history of the early trail drives and more music about life on the trail still to come. But I think you'll get a kick out of Baxter Black as he recreates his days as a Little Britches rodeo announcer. And then it's the Rangeland News when the Spirit of the West continues right after this.
Howdy, friends. This is Baxter Black on Spirit of the West with Hugh McLennan with a little peek at the Little Britches announcer. Ladies and gentlemen and followers of cowboy humor, I have carved another book from my funny bone, guaranteed to tickle your humorous. Sorry. The title is Scrambled Wisdom. Almost isn't is it? Which almost makes sense. Regardless, it's almost $20, only $19.95 plus shipping. Call 800-654-2550 or online at baxterblack.com. I am a keen observer of on-air TV and radio personalities, rambling professors, and occasional politicians who are forced on a regular basis to fill dead air. It is not an easy task for most people. Picture yourself introducing the guest speaker at the pork producer's banquet when a note is passed up that the speaker had to have an emergency appendectomy. Well, for most people, this would instill panic, but others I know would handle it with aplomb, and I admit I am one of the latter. In my case, I know where I developed that ability and honed my skill at filling dead air. I used to announce Little Britches rodeos. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our next contestant in the Pee-wee flag race is little Bobby Roddy. Bobby is the son, third child actually, of James and Sarah Roddy, who farmed just south of Homedale. Go, Bobby! Sarah, as most of you know, kick 'em, Bobby, make 'em trot. Sarah operates an antique knick-knack shop on Highway 19 where you can buy baskets of dead flowers and wallpaper with ducks on it. Come on, Bobby, give him the over and under. Bobby's in the second grade. It's good, Bobby. Aim to the right. You're going to the wrong barrel. You need the one with the flag in it. Bobby's sister, Carrie Ann, was up earlier riding this same horse, and she posted a blistering 2-minute, 59-second run, which leaves her in second place. Right, Bobby. Grab the flag. Come on. You can ride back around. Now, grab it now. We should point out that Circle J Trailers was kind enough. Whoa, Bobby. You need to ride back and stick the flag in that barrel in the other barrel. No, well, that's all right. Just put it wherever you want. Anyway, Circle J, Bobby, this way. Lots of good sponsors help make this exciting event. Swing him back this way, Bobby. Right toward the man with the red flag. We owe a great big thanks. Don, wake up. Whoa, pull up, Bobby. We better get the paramedics out there to check Don. Anyway, how about a great big hand for Bobby Roddy? His time was a blistering 3 minutes and 25 seconds. Our next contestant is Bobby's younger brother. This is Baxter Black on Spirit of the West with Hugh McLennan. Thanks for listening.
So what are you doing from August 29th to September 13th, 2019? Well, Billy and I will be hosting our 18th annual Spirit of the West cruise, and here's where we'll be going. We'll fly to Dublin, Ireland. We'll be visiting an Irish thoroughbred breeding farm. We'll be hosted by the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation, and then we'll sail to some historic and beautiful places including Cork, Belfast, then Glasgow and Inverness, Scotland. And we might even get pictures of Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster. And we'll have stops in Paris and London. Now, this is something we've always wanted to do, and we'd love to have you join us. Get all the information at 1-800-530-0131. And check our Spirit of the West cruise page at hugh-mclennan.com and our cruise Facebook page. There's more history of those great trail drives of the past still to come. The past still to come? That sounds contradictory. Anyway, just ahead of the Rangeland News, here's Jim Reeder and a good song about those 1880s days.
Swing your leg up for the saddle. Take your seats, boys, let's move 'em on out. We got us a trail drive, and it's a hard life. Go easy on the reins, boys, but hold the herd in tight. The trail is long, boys, the hill's unending. We're heading for water and a good night's graze. 5 a.m. now, a cool breeze and coffee. It's just about perfect for another 20-mile day. So swing your leg up for the saddle, and take your seats, boys, let's move 'em on out. A trail drive, and it's a hard life. Go easy on the reins, boys, but hold the herd in tight. Started out as a drover, I ate dust as a dragman. I rode flank chasing quitters, then took the point with the leading steers. Now I'm a trail boss. I buy and sell all the new stock and hire all the crew who can make a 1,000-mile trek. So swing your leg up for the saddle. Take your seats, boys, let's move 'em on out. It's a trail drive, and it's a hard life. Go easy on the reins, boys, but hold the herd in tight. Go easy on the reins, boys, but hold the herd in tight.
The news of the Rangeland, a roundup of news and coming events from around the West.
At the top of page 1, it says a lot of factors play into the cattle markets, especially at this time of year, and U.S. feedlot placements is an indicator a lot of analysts look at. Here's Gary Crawford with some of those trends.
The largest July cattle feedlot placement number since July 2012 at almost 1 3/4 million head, resulting in the largest August feedlot inventory since at least 1996 at just over 11 million head. This from Friday's USDA Cattle on Feed report for feedlots with 1,000 head or more capacity. USDA livestock analyst Shay O'Shagam says that big placement number, 8% above July a year ago, could be caused by a number of things.
Greater availability of cattle for placement in general. There were about 0.5% more cattle available to be placed on feed. Add to that the availability of additional heifers, as producers had indicated they were slowing down the rate of expansion. So those could be animals which were then being placed during July.
Plus, feeder calves are fetching a bit more money than last year, and
in some areas, declining pasture quality, putting pressure on some producers to put animals in feedlots.
Result of all this, a lot of beef coming into the market in about 6 months, and of course,
more downward pressure on prices.
In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
12 combines and assorted tractors, grain carts, and grain trucks made short work of 150 acres of spring wheat last month in a field just east of Tabor, Alberta. And proceeds from the irrigated crop will go to the Canadian Food Grains Bank, which will use the funds to help feed the hungry in other countries. The exact amount of those proceeds remains to be determined, but given that all the crop inputs and equipment were donated, the net should be pretty close to the gross. And money from the projects is likely to be used in South Sudan, where more than 1 million people don't have enough food, as well as in Lebanon and Jordan, where thousands of Syrian refugees have fled. In 2008, a research paper from animal behaviorist Jennifer Woods of Alberta and Temple Grandin from the University of Colorado examined livestock transport accidents, and more than half of the reported truck accidents involved cattle. About 60% of accidents happened between midnight and 9 a.m., and 80% were single-vehicle accidents, no other vehicles involved. The CFIA recently released a list of 9,500 comments received on the proposed amendments to Canada's Humane Transportation Regulations for Livestock. A 2009 Agriculture Canada project found that 99% of long-haul cattle did arrive healthy and safely, and more than 500,000 feeders and fat cattle were involved in that study. And now, just so you don't run out of things to worry about, an exotic tick species new to North America has appeared in a number of states in the U.S. It's known as the long-horned tick, and it was previously thought to be native to China, Korea, and Japan, and has also been established in New Zealand and Australia. Wow, how did they get there? The longhorn tick is a hard-nosed tick species and has now been identified in Arkansas, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia. The longhorn tick has not been identified in Canada yet, but it appears that it could spread further in North America. And a recent study funded by the Beef Cattle Research Council and carried out by Agriculture Canada scientists in Lethbridge updated the tick distributions for Western Canada and demonstrated that Rocky Mountain tick is still prevalent in British Columbia, Alberta, and Western Saskatchewan. The American dog tick is more prevalent in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and the ranges of the two ticks do overlap in southern Saskatchewan. Anticipated regulatory changes to Canada's livestock traceability system have been delayed until next year. The earliest we'll be advancing these will be in the spring of next year, so we can work out any issues that remain, said Colleen Barnes, the Associate Vice President of Policy and Programs Branch at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And speaking at the Canadian Beef Industry Conference held in London, she reiterated the need for a strong system to deal with animal health implications and improved market access where trading partners requested. And a rancher in Washington state reportedly shot at a wolf in self-defense, according to investigators who went to the scene on August the 24th and found no evidence that the wolf actually had been shot. The rancher told the investigators that he shot at a black-collared wolf matching the description of a male wolf in what's known as the Togo pack. A male wolf was fitted with a GPS collar in June from the Togo pack, and officials with the Federation received data from the wolf's collar indicating it was still alive. The collar is equipped with a mortality indicator that sends an email to the wildlife managers when a mortality is detected. The rancher was checking on his cow herd after the collar data indicated the wolf was near his livestock, and after having a look at the area, he saw and heard several wolf pups barking and growling, and then he shot at the male adult as it approached him while it was barking. The Togo Pack has been responsible for 6 cases of livestock depredation since November, with 3 cases occurring in August over a 10-day period. There's a big calf sale, along with a regular cattle sale at the Kamloops yards of the BC Livestock Co-op on September the 25th, and a calf sale at the Williams Lake yards on the 26th, Williams Lake regular cattle sale September 27th, and the next regular cattle sale in Vanderhoof September 28th. And you can, of course, get all the information at bclivestock.bc.ca, and you can watch the sales live streaming on that site. Meanwhile, at the Innisfail Auction Market, regular cattle sales every Wednesday, and the pre-sort sales have started now. To book your calves, give them a call at 1-800-710-3166, and you can see InnisfailAuctionMarket.com. Just kind of chuckling about the final item coming up. Another one from our buddy Bud Edgar, finest strict roper in his price range. Anyway, Bud says, I have had my 6-year-old chocolate lab Baxter for a year today. Now, he's not named after that other Baxter. That was his name when I got him. Anyway, it made me think of this story. Animal control came to my house, and they said they caught my dog chasing a guy on a bicycle. I told them that was impossible. My dog doesn't even ride a bicycle. Thanks, Bud, and that's the Rangeland News. Next on the Urban Saddles and Western Wear Horse Training File, a look at a horse that keeps dropping to a trot when his rider tries to keep him in a lope. More from Ken Mather, and a look at our next cruise for 2019 when the Spirit of the West continues right after this. Welcome back to the Spirit of the West. The Urban Saddles and Western Wear Horse Training File is coming right up with a look at a horse that can't seem to sustain his lope without dropping into a trot. And more trail driving songs and history coming up too. But first, so what are you doing from August 29th to September 13th, 2019? Well, Billy and I will be hosting our 18th annual Spirit of the West cruise, and here's where we'll be going. We'll fly to Dublin, Ireland. We'll be visiting an Irish thoroughbred breeding farm. We'll be hosted by the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation, and then we'll sail to some historic and beautiful places including Cork, Belfast, then Glasgow and Inverness, Scotland. And we might even get pictures of Nessie the Loch Ness Monster. And we'll have stops in Paris and London. Now, this is something we've always wanted to do, and we'd love to have you join us. Get all the information at 1-800-530-0131. And check our Spirit of the West cruise page at hugh-mclennan.com and our cruise Facebook page.
Now it's time for the Horse Training File, brought to you by Irvine Tack and Western Wear, Canada's largest Western store.
How do you spell back to school? I-R-V-I-N-E.
Mister, you need help.
Back to school starts with Urban Tack and Western Wear. It's Western wear with a welcome twist, even for the littlest cowboys and cowgirls. Latest styles, biggest brand names, jeans, boots, shirts, outerwear, and accessories too. Tell your folks and then saddle up for Urban's today.
Pretty smart for a guy who can't spell so good.
Urban Tack and Western Wear, off exit 305 on Highway 2 by Crossfield, open 7 days a week.
Don't just wear it, live it. Urban Tack and Western Wear.
It was fun putting that one together. Well, this week a rider says he has a busy office job and a fairly new horse. He only gets to ride on weekends, and his biggest complaint, he says, is that his horse is quite green but quiet and gentle. So far, so good. But he is really reluctant to lope or canter, the horse that is. He'll get into a fairly fast trot, and when he asks him to lope, he'll do it for about 10 strides and then drop back to a trot. And the rider says he gets exhausted kicking and kicking to keep him in that lope every 10 strides. Well, at my advanced age, I can tell you, and my horse is connected to me, and he lopes effortlessly for as long as I want, that's a great feeling. But when he's off a bit and I'm working hard to keep him in a consistent lope, after about a quarter mile, and after all that pedaling, I'm puffing way harder than the horse is. Now, often new riders are taught to canter or lope in a small arena for the control and the confinement that it offers. Unfortunately, though, that usually means that as soon as you get going, you have to turn. And the turn causes the rider sometimes to lose balance and pull on the reins. And the combination of losing balance and pulling back on the reins to turn causes the horse to break his gait. I find it much easier to be out on a long, easy trail with maybe a slight upward incline or a big, smooth pasture that helps the horse think forward rather than the turn is coming up. And another thing that helps, I'll sometimes have Billy or another rider along with me, and then she'll start her horse into a lope and mine will often lope right along with her. And that's a lot easier than thumping and kicking with my heels. And something else I've used a lot with young horses on the first few rides is to reward even the effort to lope with a rest. When he takes those first few loping strides, depending on how he feels, I'll just let him stop on his own and take a short rest. And often the next time he lopes, he'll go a little further. And eventually he'll find that active sweet spot where everything feels good, his lope is free and easy, and the rider is in perfect harmony and balance. And boy, there's nothing better than that. And for Irvin Saddles and Western Wear, that's the Horse Training File. Something else that our horses really enjoy is that daily feeding of Hoffman's horse ration. We've got 2 of them on the seniors ration diet now, and it really seems to work. You can find out more at hoffmanshorseration.com. And Ken Mather talks about the famous Harper brothers, Jerome and Thaddeus, who among other things started the famous Gang Ranch and the Harper Ranch, and a lot of young fellas had their first work experience riding on those long and rugged trails, trailing cattle from Prince George, the Quesnel, the Blackwater country, down through the Caribou and all the way to the railhead at Ashcroft. And the First Nations people had some advice for these young cowboys. You see, the side hills along the Caribou Trail were covered with blue stem bunch grass, real nutritious feed for cattle and horses, and the natives told these young cowboys that the grass also had spiritual qualities, and it could keep evil spirits away. So a lot of them would grab a handful of blue stem grass and dally it around their saddle horn. I was only 16 when I left my home, joined up with a cattle drive, riding my old roam. Too young to know better, too wise for my age, we pushed those white-faced cattle out across that endless sage. Dally the blue stem grass, son, round your saddle horn. Say your prayers out on the trail, watch out for lightning storms. Ashcroft town's the railhead for this cattle drive. If you want to draw your wages, boys, get 'em there alive. It was me and Bronco Bill, Smokey and old Sam. I remember Cookie telling me he came from Alabama. They'd talk about the prairie with the grass up to their knees. Sometimes it made you feel like a sailor on the sea. Dally the blue stem grass, son, round your saddle horn. Say your prayers out on the trail, watch out for lightning storms. Ashcroft town's the railhead for this cattle drive. If you want to draw your wages, boys, get 'em there alive. 60 days of burning sun, 60 days of blowing wind. Sometimes I wondered if this cattle drive would ever end. 8 cents a pound for the meat, 2 bits for the hide. If we get these white-faced cattle to the railhead alive. And they said, dally the blue stem grass, son, round your saddle horn. Say your prayers out on the trail, watch out for lightning storms. Ashcroft Town's the railhead for this cattle drive. If you want to draw your wages, boys, get 'em there alive. If you want to draw your wages, boys, get 'em there alive.
Well, Ken Lee wrote that, and it's on our now just about sold out CD, The Creak of the Leather. And Ken Mather has more about the Harper brothers.
Thaddeus Harper. Now, he and his brother Jerome were the early cattle drovers into British Columbia, and for a time there, they were the big dealers in BC in the 1860s. Of course, they eventually settled the Gang Ranch, which is very famous and very large even today, but they had a surplus of cattle. And so they decided they'd go looking for a market, and they thought originally, Thaddeus Harper decided he would lead the drive, and they decided originally they would drive them to the head of the railway that was being constructed across the United States, and then take them to the Chicago market. So they rounded up 400 head of cattle and bought an additional couple of hundred head at the O'Keefe Ranch in the North Okanagan, and then drove them down into the USA. They decided that when winter started coming, they were in northern Idaho at the time. And so they sent some of the cowboys home and left the rest to herd them through the winter. And come spring, Harper heard that, in fact, cattle prices in Chicago were really, really low, and there wasn't a whole lot of percentage in that. But California had had a particularly tough winter, and there was a market in San Francisco. So Harper, being the entrepreneur he was, said, boys, we're heading to San Francisco. Well, they drove those 600 or 700 head of cattle all the way to San Francisco, sold them at a tidy profit, and returned to British Columbia with their pockets jingling with silver, taken from the Philistines of San Francisco.
Wonder what route would they have taken? Any of the old Chisholm Trail or the Oregon Trail going the other way, going down there?
Probably they would have stayed on the west side of the Rockies. They definitely would have trailed them through the Great Basin in Oregon and Idaho, but they would have used the trails that were used by a lot of the people who'd traveled through to settle into California and in the Oregon Territory as well.
You can read much more of the fascinating history in Ken's book, Buckaroos and Mud Pups, published by Heritage House. You can order the book at heritagehouse.ca. And I guess some of us were really fortunate to relive some of those days on those Kamloops cattle drives, where we trailed a herd for 5 or 6 days into the city of Kamloops, but our camps on the trail were a lot more comfortable than those early ones. And I wonder, will we ever see those days again?
There's no wrangling jobs in Texas. It's the end of the cattle drives. Now they round 'em up and move 'em out by rail. They don't need no longhorns up in Kansas anymore. And the sun's going down on the old Chisholm Trail. No more dusty drives to Abilene, shooting up the town, getting drunk and waking up in jail. That way of life is over for a Texas cattle drover, and the sun's going down on the old Chisholm Trail. Into the sunset you must ride, boys, it's time to let go of yesterday. You drove your last drive, boys, it's time to saddle up and ride away. We'd push those cows across the waters of the swollen Red River. They'd fuss and fight, but the cowboy would prevail. We were tough as uncued leather, thought those days would last forever. Now the sun's going down on the old Chisholm Trail. Now it's a mighty empty trail from Fort Worth up to Kansas, where the dust would rise from all those broomtails. Then came the barbed wire and the greed. Now the cowboys are dying to breed, and the sun's going down on the old Chisholm Trail. Into the sunset you must ride. Boys, it's time to let go of yesterday. You drove your last drive. Boys, it's time to saddle up and ride away. I'll miss those nights around the campfire, drink coffee in a tin, when all those buckaroos start swapping tans. I long to hear a cowboy cussing when them doggies start to fussing. But the sun's going down on the old Chisholm Trail. The sun's going down on the old Chisholm Trail.
David John, Comstock Cowboys, and our classic Song of the West segment is next. Then the Cowboy Poetry Spotlight, when the Spirit of the West continues right after this. Welcome back to the Spirit of the West. Our classic Western song segment has another one of those trail driving songs. This one written by Tim Spencer, and it was recorded first by the Sons of the Pioneers on their Tellway transcription series in 1947. And here's the voice of Bob Nolan from that transcription to introduce the song that will be sung by the Sons of the San Joaquin.
I do. This is Bob Nolan and all the Sons of the Pioneers. You know, a lot of people get the idea that rounding up and driving cattle to market is something like a stampede with cowboys shooting off 6 guns and yelling and hollering. But don't you believe it. Any smart cowpuncher knows that when you make those cattle run, you're losing pounds of beef. So they take it easy, plenty easy. Even though sometimes from a cowboy's viewpoint, those cattle move just a shade too slow.
Slow-moving cattle, you're moving mighty slow. Don't you know you gotta go home? Slow little doggies, you're trailing way behind. Don't you know you'll never find your home? Just for you, green pastures wait ahead, there at the home corral. But for me, there's something else instead. It's my blue-eyed gal who's waiting. Slow-moving cattle, move on, your lazy bone. Don't you know you gotta go home? Trailing way behind. Don't you know you'll never find your home? Just for you, green pastures wait ahead, there at the home corral. But for me, there's something else instead. It's my blue-eyed gal who's waiting, slow-moving cattle. Move on, your lazy bones. Whoopie-toddle, waddle on home. Slow-moving cattle, hurry on home.
And now, here's Miss Letty in the Cowboy Poetry Spotlight.
I wasn't even alive back then, and I am a woman, you know. So I wouldn't have been a-riding with them old cowboys on a trail. But if you could read my mind, oh, the stories my imagination could tell. I'd tell of a warm, glowing campfire at night, with my partners close at hand, as I'd sup on coffee, beans, and jerky, and I'd gaze out over the land, in wonder of what tomorrow could bring, a stampede, or a river, or just an easy time. And as the boys play cards on a worn saddle blanket, I just might pull out my last dime to wager on what they're betting on. Or should I save it for some rock candy? When next I'm in a town, I'll most likely pay for a bath, and boy, won't that feel dandy. 'Cause I'm so dirty, and I'm so tired, and I'm sure plumb wore out. But there never is a moment that could ever make me doubt why my head's on this saddle and my blanket's on the ground, and I'm about to fall into a deep, restful sleep as I listen to the sound of the wind whistling on the prairie, and I can hear a pretty night bird sing. I'll be thanking my Father in heaven not to change a doggone thing. Yes, I can be on the trail any time I want. I just close my eyes and I'm there, with my horse so solid between my knees and the feel of the wind in my hair. As I listen to a sagebrush symphony behind a coyote's wailing, I pull out my old guitar and send a sweet melody a-sailing across the flat plains up the walls of a mesa. Yes, it echoes oh so sweet as I sing these cowhand songs of ore. To my heart it sure is a treat. So when you watch me singing and my eyes are closed shut tight, know that I'm a cowhand on the trail, on a prairie, somewhere in my heart tonight.
Thank you so much for making the ride this week, and I sure hope you can be back here next week right at the same time. And as always, thanks to Mark and Kathy McMillan, our support crew. And if you are looking for tractor parts, any make, any year, see Mark's page, bctractorparts.com. And remember, you can subscribe to Canadian Cowboy Country Magazine by calling 1-800-943-7336. Till next week, I'm Hugh McLennan. Hope to see you down the trail somewhere real soon.